Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey, what's up everybody, Shimo here, and we're taking a look at the subclasses of Hunters in SMITE. Now, just to get you caught back up, Hunters are obviously ranged physical damage dealers, usually relying on basic attacks. But as we'll see, not all of them. So subclasses could also be called archetypes within the individual class. Because obviously, even though there's a bunch of characters under this one class, there can be significant differences in them, and what their strengths are and how they function. We'll also talk about why you pick them and what you miss out by picking them, rather than a different subclass. And of course there's going to be overlap. Some characters are more like another subclass at one part of the game and then are another subclass at another part of the game. There's going to be some overlap for sure. And also these subclasses and archetypes, it doesn't really exist. It's just a way to help describe the characters and lump them into their own little subsections so that you know what sort of characters you might enjoy if you like one of them. So let's get into pure basic attack hunters. Now originally this was going to be called attack speed hunters, but that didn't really work because, like for instance Jing Wei, she doesn't focus on attack speed necessarily, but she pumps out almost all of her damage through her basic attacks, so she's a basic attack hunter still. So basically this is anybody who focuses on dealing damage almost 100% with their basic attacks, whether that be through high attack speed or just really potent basic attacks. Now of course what their strengths are is that they are amazing late game characters. Basic attacks come out, and come out, and come out. You never run out of basic attacks. So if you itemized well, you'll shred through tanks, you'll shred through squishies, you'll shred through anybody. And of course, since basic attacks don't run out, you always have follow-up for your teammate. If your teammates get a good lockdown on an opponent, you just sit there basic attacking. And of course, as I mentioned, these guys tend to be your best bet against tanks. Because the best anti-tank items, for example, Executioner, Dominance, Kin Size, they all work off of your basic attacks. And who would be better at applying them than hunters who focus on using their basic attacks to apply damage? And just generally speaking, they also have plenty of mobility to get around safely. Because as I mentioned before, you gotta keep the basic attack movement speed penalty in mind. Since these guys are sitting there holding down the basic attack button, they're usually slowed down, and as a result, they tend to have decent mobility. And of course, why you pick them, it tends to be when you're against a tankier team. Again, hunters have access to the absolute best anti-tank items, so why not bring in a character who can just abuse all those items and shred the tanks? They're also good when you know the game is going to go late, because as you can kind of guess, these guys are not too great in laning phase. So if you know you're not going to get pushed in too hard and you're not going to get too far behind, and you know the game is going to go later on, then you can safely pick these guys, and it's going to be a positive trade in your favor. But of course, what you miss out on, attack speed does have a limit, so on those characters who do focus on attack speed, you can just get to the 2.5 attack speed cap and sorta have your attack speed not matter as much anymore. I mean, you can only apply kins 2.5 times a second, that's the limit. So you can kinda run out in quotes in that regard. But of course that's where crit comes in too. These guys are all good at using crit as well. So in that sense, it's also really important that you pick your items wisely. You need every single item to be doing something and getting you to your final, impactful basic attack damage number that you can keep on outputting over and over again. That is to say, a good mix of penetration, maybe your critical strike chance, maybe your kins, some lifesteal to keep yourself sustained, and of course the attack speed to pump it all down. That didn't sound appropriate. But as I also mentioned, they tend not to be very good in laning. They can be good, I mean, especially if you're against another basic attack based character, yeah, you guys are just gonna shoot at each other all day and you're gonna stagnate. But if you get against someone like an Anher, yeah, he's kind of just gonna jump on you and there's nothing you can do. You can't outtrade someone like Anher, Ullr, Medusa, etc. And they also lack utility options, such as any sort of CC really. They kind of only bring damage and that's it. So your team kind of needs to work around you and make up for the fact that you're not going to be putting out any CC. All you got is damage and they have to support you. Which not everyone wants to do, but I mean if you're Rom or Jing Wei, are you going to slow with Rom? You're going to do a really sick Jing Wei knock-up to engage the fight? No, it's up to your team to set up for and support you. So if you get behind and your teammates think you're kind of useless, it can feel pretty bad. So let's get to the characters that don't have that problem at all, ability-based hunters. And of course their strength is that they have the best laning phase out of any hunter. They just one-shot waves left and right. And of course they also have a lot more CC than other hunters. This is to sorta have some self-setup. For example, Medusa's Root into her 1, Ullr's Axe Stance 1 into a 3-1. Obviously just stuff that only hits one person, but it's still more than enough to get their combos going. And speaking of combos, these guys are insane from ahead. From ahead, someone like Ullr is basically just a ranged assassin. I mean, the burst really can get that crazy if they're ahead, which again they're good at doing because they're really good in the laning phase. And they also tend to have decent mobility too. This is to get themselves in and out of fights. It's not the best mobility in the game, but it's more than enough to either get fights going or get themselves out of fights. And of course, why you pick them is that you have a team who are really good at bursting people. Since these ADCs don't have that sort of sustained damage like the basic attack based characters and focus more on burst, you want other characters who focus on burst too. Like say you have a Scylla with an Initiator Guardian, little things like that. You could just follow up with your own damage, which is almost as high as a mage's, but you're able to kill towers too. And of course you also use these characters to dominate lanes against late game ADCs. Again, like those Jingweis and Rams, they can't really do much if you're just bashing their face in with a Uller Leap over and over again and then you solo every single camp in the lane. And also, you can use most of these characters in the mid lane actually to give yourself a better damage spread across the team. Like for instance right now, Freya's really good, so you want to pick Freya in the ADC role. But your teammates, they want to pick warriors in the solo lane, assassins in the jungle, so then you can just go a hunter in mid and have a good damage spread across the team. Of course, what you miss out on, they are really bad from behind. That's the main factor. There's a good chance they could just never get going. Sure, that 2.5 attack speed cap can be kind of painful when you're on a basic attack based character, but these ability based hunters definitely have a window where they're really good, and then once the game gets later and later, the less effective they become. Of course, once you start getting into like 3k pot territory, yeah, they can start one-shotting again. But it's a bit like those poke mages I talked about before. There's this sort of pocket of time where if they didn't get a good lead, their damage starts to fall off a little bit. And also they're dependent on certain items being strong to be good, this being things like Jotuns, Transcendence, Heartseeker, and so on, the big heavy hitter physical damage items. And also they tend to lack some tower damage versus attack speed hunters, but it's still pretty good, but it is something to keep in mind. And on the note of those movement abilities, they are good, but I mean, Uller Leap, he has no built-in CC immunity either, so if you pick Uller, you can get against an Awilix and just die constantly, and if you're Medusa and you get 3-man ganked, you can very easily be blocked in, things like that, or you're someone like AMC or Scotty who doesn't even have a leap. So let's move on to the final class, Utility Hunters, which this one definitely has the most overlap, but I mean just look at the characters, these guys have way more utility than the other characters in the class, but they also don't have the ability damage or the basic attack damage to really be put in those classes either, so I just put them in a class of their own. So what their strengths is that they can obviously still carry in terms of damage. I mean Apollo's passive attack speed, yeah, it's not like Rom 2 where you just activate it and start blowing people up, but he can definitely still carry. But the main thing is that they have unique abilities that enemies may just not have an answer for. If they don't have a counter to Chernobog ultimate, if they can't quickly answer an Apollo split pushing with his ultimate active, I mean, what are they going to do? They can't stop them. And of course if they lack CC immunity, they can just be Heimdall ulted all day, things like that. And also these guys do tend to be good in the laning phase. Not quite as good as those pure ability based characters, but they also just tend to have a really good clear, despite the fact that they tend to have pretty flexible attack speed boosts as well. And of course also they definitely have the best in-class mobility and CC. Fast dashes as well as the ability to self-peel as well, and also just straight up lock targets down like with a Hachiman dash or an Ishtar ultimate. I mean these guys are tricky to catch sometimes. Again, like I mentioned, you tend to pick them later so you know you'll be difficult to catch and you won't just be countered. But alright, why you pick them? So you make up for weaknesses in the draft. Like for instance, if your team fight is just plain not good and no hunter available is going to stop that, you can just pick a Chernobog or an Apollo to split push. If they have a crazy amount of CC that you know just one set of beads won't help with, you can just pick Anhur or Ishtar, who have these great CC immune abilities, so that they're not just instantly dead if they don't have purification beads up, but also they can counter someone on the enemy team, usually the enemy ADC. Like for instance, I mentioned earlier, Anhur just leaping on a basic attack based hunter and killing them to death, because his early game damage is just that insane. But of course also they can be flexible in their builds. They can have crit, they can have attack speed and kins and stuff like that. It all fits them like a glove. They don't have specific items that they need to buy, like for instance ability hunters. They can basically build what basic attack based characters build, and even though they can't use it quite as well, they still do plenty of damage. Of course, what you miss out on, they need to be picked in the right situation. Otherwise, you definitely should have just picked someone else, because as I mentioned, the ability damage and the basic attack damage, it's just plain not as good as other characters. So you need to make sure that the utility you pick them for, whether that be CC, CC immunity, or the ability to do things like split push, will have an impact, because if it doesn't, you should have just picked someone else. And of course, while their CC is good, I mean, it's still not an assassin or, God forbid, tank level of CC. Hunters still have the weakest CC in the game by a country mile, so even though Ishtar ult and Hachiman dash and Hachiman ult are all good and well, it's not like they have ESET levels of CC or something like that. So you can't just rely on them to be the CC for your team. They don't work like that. And of course, if they get too far behind, their ability to counter is just out of the window. Like, who cares if Ishtar has the ability to completely immune, say, a Daji or Ares ultimate very easily, if she's just going to get blown up by the sheer damage she takes and she can't deal enough back. Or say you're Chernobog or Apollo and you're split pushing, I mean, all it's really going to take when you're behind is just one person coming over, and then your team is just in a 4v4 anyways when they were behind, so didn't really matter that you picked Apollo or Chernobog in that case. So you gotta be wise about when you pick them, and also just not get behind in general. which can be difficult to pull off sometimes. But that's all I've got for hunter subclasses. What do you guys think? Would you have just put them into either ability hunters or basic attack hunters? Do you think the utility hunters subclass was pointless? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.